Jesus way.
Oh, the Jesus way
Is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way.
Oh, the Jesus way
Is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace begin with me.
Today we're talking about retirement living. People are living longer, people are working longer, and retirement is not something on everyone's mind, but it should be. Welcome to Brethren Voices. Today we're talking to retired Brethren minister Kerby Lauderdale. Kerby, welcome to Brethren Voices.
Thank you, Brent.
So when did you retire?
In February of 2014,
So that's very recently.
a year ago.
How long have you been thinking about retirement, and where would you like to retire?
Seriously thinking about it, probably for the last 10 years. Knowing I was very happy living in Portland, Oregon, with children and family here. This is where I would like to retire. And so I have had a lot of my enjoyment time invested in the garden surrounding this house. I enjoyed the activity and the free time to spend all the time I wanted tending the garden. So I wasn't in any urgency. Talking about retirement or thinking in details wasn't that urgent.
You live in a lovely home. It's a large home, about 2,700 square feet and 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, as I recall. And you've lived here quite a while.
Yes. Well, when I moved into this house in the late 90s, I was completing my work as a gardener, commercial landscaping, not commercial, residential landscaping, but basically gardening for people's yards. And I realized I couldn't do that indefinitely, but one of the things that occurred to me that would be a pleasant retirement activity for me would be creating this house as a bed and breakfast, 2 bedrooms, and tending a Japanese-style garden around the house. The garden would be appealing to guests, and it would be an activity that I imagined enjoying very much. That's the reason I began to design the garden as I did and to remodel the house. As that process was ending, Peace Church of the Brethren here in Portland asked if I would be interested in being part-time pastor. That trumped the bed and breakfast for me.
So the home actually never ended up as a bed and breakfast?
That's correct. It was very compelling for me to be able to re-enter the pastorate and to pastor the church of which I had been a part of for a number of years. So that changed my sense of the use of the house and how I would retire here. The other important thing about retirement is that as a pastor, I had the experience, the blessing of an experience with many people making their decisions about retirement and retirement living.
As a minister, you would have dealt with people who are retiring and getting old and dying, also with the families of people who are getting old as their parents aged, and you also would have had some experience with the Brethren family retirement, or family homes, I guess they're called Brethren family retirement homes.
Right.
So you've had a lot of experience with a lot of people who've gone through the process that you had to go through yourself.
Right. It began when I met Linda, before we were married. She had spent her high school years with her parents managing the Greenville, Ohio home. And so this was an introduction to the concept of retirement home living. And it seemed very reasonable and appealing. And that blossomed throughout my years as a pastor, experiencing with many other people their decisions to move into a retirement facility while they were still active, such so that they were in the place where they could receive care as that became necessary in the process of aging.
I imagine you've experienced people who have waited too long to make a good decision, and people who have thought about it and made a plan early on about their retirement living.
Yes, I've seen all of those circumstances develop. It seemed to me that the happiest outcome in coping with aging is those people who decided to move from their home or move into a retirement home facility while they had the choice, while they were able to make the choice, and while they were still active in a healthy way to participate in the move and moving into a place of their choice. That it was my recommendation that every one of the congregation get a calendar some years in advance and circle the decade when they were going to be in their 70s and the following decade in their 80s, so that they knew those years in their mind and realized that some health event was likely to occur during that time, so that they might begin to think where they wanted to be, what circumstance did they want for their living situation. And for myself, those decades of the 2020s, well, the teens, because I'm 20 teens, I'm in my 70s, and 2020s, I'll be in my 80s. I know something
Will happen.
the aging process. So that it's really, if I want to have some say in where I want to be living and how I want to be living and who do I want to be living with, I need to have that in mind now.
I have seen the tragedy of people who had the fantasy of living in their own home and dying in their own bed evaporate when something happened and they were moved or had to move and had no choice about it.
Right.
Because it was just not possible to be taken care of in their home. So I think what you're saying is very significant, and most people really don't want to think that way. They want to have this fantasy that they're going to basically live healthily, and one day they'll not wake up in their own home or their own bed. But for most people, that just doesn't happen.
Life is continually surprising, and we cannot predict our health, our future health, or accidents. I have stairways. This is a 3-story house, including the basement, and I have any number of times caught my heel on the step as I'm going down the stairs, and usually had hold of the railing, but I realize that could happen sometime when I'm not thinking about it, and if I lived here long enough, it would happen. Maybe not those stairs, it might be outside, but some kind of stumbling is a function of aging process, because we get weaker no matter how much we exercise, and you have less strength and less sense of balance. These things are just predictable. And so thinking about how am I going to handle that, What circumstances am I going to be living in, so that the impact of that is minimal, psychologically and physically. Those are reasonable things to consider.
Is it your experience that the options are different for people who are proactive in planning ahead for retirement living versus the people who wait too long and an event triggers the necessity of their moving?
Yes, because if you fall in your home, unless you've made very specific requests or indicating what your desires are, somebody else is going to make a decision about where you go. And if you go to a hospital, that may be in your mind where you would go to a hospital, but after the hospital care, if you require assisted living, if you haven't given thought to where you would, where that might take place, somebody's going to have to make that decision for you. You may be able to consult in that, but it's still something that if you have thought about, then you have a little less anxiety, I think, about that process.
There may be some limitations on moving into a place of your desire and your choice if you haven't made some plans ahead of time, because aren't there some waiting lists in some of the nicer places? You have to make a plan ahead. How far do people plan ahead or need to?
I think while you're still very active, thinking about where you want to live, whether it's the same town, whether it's in the country, and whether you want to be near your children who may have moved away from a family home. All of those things are important considerations in what you decide. But in the Church of the Brethren, they have participated across the nation in establishing retirement homes with three-level care, most of them. That is independent living, assisted living, and nursing care, pretty much within the same facility.
Why you say three-level care? Why is three-level care important?
I know of a number of people in this area and friends who have moved into places which are primarily residents for seniors, and that's for independent living. Those are places that are comfortable, that provide amenities that they won't, that they may not have if they live alone in their homes, but they don't have the care in that same facility when you need some assisted living. If you fall and break a hip or even less injury, but you need someone to assist you in your getting dressed or going downstairs or
even just cooking and cleaning your house.
Right. You have to have some. There's less anxiety associated with those events if you have thought out how you will manage that change in your life, so that I would hire a in-home person, and I know several who could do that. If you make that kind of choice, that's a smart thing to do for a person who wants to stay in their home.
But you're also thinking that some people who need more help can't stay in the independent living place that they had selected to live in as
Right.
a retiree because those services aren't available. So you have to move again.
That's correct. If you are if you move into a situation, a retirement facility, which has these three levels of care, your move may be from one room to another, or one floor to another, or one section of the building to another, but it won't be a household move. And not having the anxiety of that, particularly if you don't have family or friends who are ready to help you make those moves, that makes those difficult times easier to manage, less anxiety, and can perhaps shorten the healing time.
There was an article in the New Yorker recently about the loneliness of getting old. And I would imagine if you have to move to a place not of your choosing, Or suddenly if something happens and you have a stroke or something, you're moving into a place you've never been before, you don't know anybody, nobody knows you as a healthy person, it could be very lonely.
It would be profoundly lonely.
So moving to a facility that has these three levels of care could be very important in terms of have a community of support of people you know.
A very good fortune for me is that living within walking distance of this house is a retirement facility of just that nature. My ex-wife and her husband some years ago were looking for among the facilities in the Portland area, and came upon this one and brought me into their searching experience and exposure to this facility, and it turns out to be a facility which is nearly perfect for my interests. And it's a 3-level care facility in the community in which we have lived for 30 years. It's a 15-story building, most of which is independent living. And in this area, a building of that size provides views, grand views, because of the mountains and the city on one side and the mountains on the other. And it also has assisted living and nursing care in the same facility.
Selling a home that you lived in for 17 years takes a lot of effort. How long have you been in the process of fixing up, cleaning up, and preparing your house for sale?
I would say basically I've kept the house in condition so that things haven't deteriorated, so that the remodeling that was done 15 years ago still seems up to date. So there wasn't a lot of work that I had to do, or major things. Several years ago, needed to have the roof replaced. 2 years after that, had the house painted. Had to do some sewer connectings, which the city was already doing, or the city required that I do, which were pretty important for the sewer system of the house. And so some of these things were timely in getting the house into the position that was appealing to someone without having to deal with major issues.
So I want to know what you're going to do with all the furniture and all this stuff that we all have in our homes.
The downsize.
That sounds easier to say than to do.
Well, but I either do it or somebody does it for me. All of us need to be aware that we die, and we know that approximately when that is going to happen, within a decade, and so we either prepare for it or we just grit our teeth and see what happens.
So for those of us who might have a challenge there, what do you do? What are you going to do with all of this stuff? And how do you decide what to keep and what to sell?
A lot of that depends on family situations, how much of your stuff will fall to your children, how much your children are interested in your stuff. These days, there are many services available to help you dispose of your stuff. There's Goodwill and Salvation Army and other donation services take almost anything, and you do get some tax credit for that, those donations. There's also people who will have in-home sales and garage sales, and everyone in this culture knows of those services, and that's a reasonable way to get value out of your furnishings.
Do you have any regrets over this whole process and what's happening and the prospect soon of moving into the independent living facility?
Regret is not the word that would come to mind. I think one of the basic facts of human existence that we ignore to our peril, but for very understandably, is that everything on this planet that has life dies. Everything. Everything.
Including us.
Most assuredly us.
That's the last thing.
Because that's where the terror in facing that arrives. But all of our institutions, all of everything human, everything that has life on this planet, in fact, life is sustained on this planet by death. There's wonder in that. So, and we ignore that to our peril, both as a race on this planet and individually and culturally. And I think that's the reason we war so much, we fight each other so much, is because we ignore death. We don't face that, the reality of it, the fullness of it.
The other part of it is, which I think is fascinating, is that we come in with nothing, we leave with nothing, and yet we spend our whole lives accumulating all these things that are so hard for many of us to let go of.
It's a wonderful experience, life is, but it's also an excruciatingly painful and terrorizing experience. Health reasons and cultural reasons and just the physicality, automobile accidents or fires or disease. But all of that is part of living and is part of the life experience of every organism on the planet. And so I think we can have the chances of having a measure of peace in that process is increased if we can honestly acknowledge that, recognize that, and say it's going to happen. I can even say that by the time the 2030s are here, the 2040s for sure, I'm not going to be here.
And we can embrace that reality with some appreciation for every moment.
And, we've gone through that with our parents, sometimes with children, certainly many friends, and partners or spouses. And it's something that I think we are wiser beings if we can embrace that which is inevitable. There's wisdom in that beyond our understanding.
Are you eager to move?
I am. It's mixed, very mixed, but I am very much looking forward to this space where I'm going to be moving. Another part of that excitement is that I'm going to spend a lot of my energy and time writing a memoir, my memoir. And that it will involve a lot of this reflection of the philosophical and spiritual aspects of what we've been talking about.
Wonderful. Kerby, will you give us a tour of the facility when you move into your new place?
Yes, I would. It would be my pleasure.
Wonderful. Kerby Lauderdale, thank you for being with us on Brother and Voices.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
You've been here about 2 weeks?
Having completed the move in 2 weeks, yes.
What are you enjoying and what are you surprised about in living here?
I suppose at the top of the list is this incredible view. When you live in Oregon or the Northwest, you're not restricted in many of this area without seeing views of incredible mountain peaks. My view faces east, and that's toward Mount Hood, with incredible number of trees Portland has encouraged, and lots of sky. So it's an incredible view of the creation. it couldn't be more pleasing to me. Not only is the exterior wall all glass, but there's a balcony that runs the length of the apartments to put plants on and to sit and visit or to eat. So you can be outside in this same space. So that's the thing that nurtures me the most. But equally is the community of adults that live here, incredibly friendly, purposely arranging times to be together, invitations to sit with various people for meals, and all manner of activities to share our talents, our intellects, and to just be friendly and supportive and pleasant with one another. It's a very vital and delightful community of which to be a part, and I found that very comforting.
Kerby, in seeing how you've decorated your apartment, it really kind of amazes me because it's wide open. There is no separate bedroom. You have a Murphy bed, bookcases, a desk, this beautiful lanai, your kitchen, and some really simple but beautiful furniture.
The living room is just transplanted from my house. It was a perfect fit in terms of the rug space, the size of the rug fitting in this living room space here. It is still significantly painful to leave other parts of your life, independent in terms of your housing, and I had developed a Japanese garden around my house over the last 15 years that was deeply beautiful to me and to many others, and yet I knew all the years that I was doing that I would only be doing it for so many years. As a sideline, I had a summer pastorate in Yuba City, California, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and a woman across the street was an avid gardener, and I marveled at her work and the time she put in there, and she was an older woman, and so I also thought, you know, there isn't too many more years she's going to be able to do that, and the garden will be different when she's no longer tending it, because a garden is its maintenance, and I belong to the garden every bit as much as it could be said the garden belonged to me. So that's just a process of life. The time passes, the garden takes care of itself, or doesn't, or changes, and I pass on.